Hi, Kareem.
Hi,
I'm
Sarah.
coming. A real pleasure to be able to speak to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
No, my pleasure. It's just because I'm in the middle of like doing another movie, so it's like my head is completely, like my face is completely a mess. But anyway, I'm very happy to talk about Firebrand.
Yeah, you have to sort of get yourself back into that mode, even though you're working on another film.
No,
I
but
guess
it's
just
worth it. I love that film. So,
yeah, well, I guess for people who haven't had a chance to see it yet, maybe you can give us just a brief intro and refresh your own memory. What can they expect when they watch Firebrand?
well, Firebrand is a thriller. It's a period thriller that takes place in the 1500s. The story very much inspired on the last days of Henry VIII, and it's centered on the story of his last wife, Catherine Parr, who is the one who survived him. So it's really the story of a survivor who endured like the last years of this king, which is a real legend, in English history called Henry VIII. So, I think it's for me, it's really a movie about survival, and it's also a movie that, despite the fact that it is about the Tudors and it takes place 500 years ago, it's a very contemporary story that I think we're seeing every day in many different countries of the world.
And I guess maybe from the outside, it seems like kind of a bit different from your other films, your first English language film, quite different subject matter, delving into sort of quite a niche aspect of English history. But then if you look at it from another way, perhaps, a fascination with, these incredible women that we've seen through history, and stories have perhaps never been told properly. And also, with outsiders, then there's kind of more thematic ground that fits with your other work. So what was the appeal for you? Did you have any kind of hesitation about taking it on? And what did you want to do with the story?
Well, I think there was a little bit of a hesitation in the very beginning because when I was talking to the producer, was having a conversation with me, I was just thinking, "Are you sure? Do you want me to do this?" And then I thought a lot about it, and I had a long sort of conversation with her. And in one hand, it's always been a dream of mine to make a wonderful, beautiful period film, and I think that was something that was very attractive. It's like, for me, it was almost like making a science fiction. There was so much there that one could play with as a filmmaker. It's like making a fable. So that was really, really, really like very attractive. But I think beyond that, I think what was really attractive for me and crucial in my decision of taking on the story of Catherine Parr was that I thought it was really interesting to tell a story that had not been told. I was really surprised when I started. I was not a specialist into the history, and when I started to really dive into it, I was really surprised that there had not been a proper fiction film made about Catherine. There was a book, which is the book that inspired us and sort of triggered us to do the film, and I was really excited. It's very interesting for a filmmaker when you feel like, why was this story not told before? And like, it's a great opportunity to take somebody who was invisible, which was the case of Catherine Parr. She's always been treated as like the nurse queen and not much more than that. And I thought it was really, really exciting to bring her to the fore and to bring her to life. And I think that's when the movie became really, really crucial to me. And yes, on talking to the producer, again, Catherine Parr is somewhat a cousin of my other characters. She's just living in a different century. I've dealt with so many characters with women who are sort of, going through the motions of keeping themselves alive and fighting for survival and dealing with the sort of horrible engines of patriarchy. So in that sense, it was a really kind of similar character, but there was a lot there. Also, I think it's really important to say that coming from the global South and being able to tell the story of, of that period of time in England, for me, was really, really exciting. I think it's very rare. I think there's a lot of filmmakers coming from the global North and telling stories about the global South. So for me, it was really exciting, the possibility of doing the other way around, And so it was new territory, but yet there was something there which was yet very familiar to me.
It was funny that you said at the beginning there, calling it a thriller, because when people perhaps see the time period that it's set in, the costumes, we have all these associations with our expectations around period drama, and it feels like you just kind of overturn a lot of them, sort of bar, the buildings and the costumes and everything else, because it does feel much more subversive, and everything feels very visceral, even sort of the pus oozing from Henry's leg,
yeah.
and the debauchery, you know, of his court. So what was your approach in that sense, and how did you want to kind of perhaps play with the audience's expectations of this genre?
So there were two things, right? I think the first thing was, when you think of Henry, I was very surprised, you know, in England about this song. What is this song like about? Like the six wives, divorce, beheaded, and then there was like, you know, this song that kids would sing in England, and I was just thinking, wow, this is like people singing about like a story which is really, really violent. And then, you know, I was really interested in looking at it from another perspective, you know, which is, it was sort of it's a sort of classic horror story of some, like a woman trapped somewhere with a monster. And what was interesting here, it was that it was a very sort of simple plot line, but at the same time, I thought it was a really interesting and fresh plot line, you know, for that context. You know, I think there is a tendency, and I understand why it's there, you know, to kind of, you know, to have a reverence for Henry and for, you know, to have a respect for what he did. And I think it is worth respect, because I think despite of what he's done in, you know, in a violent manner, there was also very interesting men there. But for me, there was something very important to undo this kind of naturalization of violence that I think that there is in regards to the Tudors. You know, I think there is so much violence, you know, happening. And it's not only the Tudors at that moment in history. And I think we look at it in a way which is as if it was devoid of violence. And then I think the second thing that for me was very important, you know, it was to look at these characters not as people who have blood, you know, like blue blood running their veins, but they have blood as me and you. You know, it was just a different context. And for me, it was really important to horn the context and to make a movie that's very, very, very loyal, you know, to everything that was happening at the time, that was very accurate. But yet, it was very important for me to not look at those characters as people that we could not touch, that people that were beyond me and you. I think it was, and I think that was not an accident. That was exactly what Catherine was fighting for. She was fighting for, if we were translating what she was fighting for, was for equality, it's for emancipation, it's for having a direct relationship to God, to not have anything between, you know, us and God, for example. And I think for me, it was really important to do both, to look at it and think, this is a horror story, and it's psychological horror, like what he actually, you know, did to Catherine and to the whole court. It had to do with this sort of terrorizing, but it was done in a very subtle manner. It was not only by killing people, because the other question I had in the beginning of this film was like, oh, every period film starts with a battle, you know, like hundreds of people dying and horses and like cavalry. And I think here was really important for me to enter the intimacy of these characters and to not look at them from far away. You know, I think it was very, when you say visceral, I think it was really important that we smell these characters. I think it's really important that we are with these characters, because I think that's also something which is it's an important critique of monarchy. And, you know, you can't forget, when I was doing this film, it was the Queen's Jubilee. So there was this whole coming back, you know, of celebrating monarchy. And for me, it was really important to also have a portrait that I haven't really seen. It's a story of domestic abuse, and there is domestic abuse in every class. And I just thought that would make us not question monarchy only, but to also read what was happening at that time in a way that's very close to us, you know. So for an audience, I think it was really, really important to relate to Catherine and to relate to Henry and to relate to the children, you know, in a way that was not something from far away, because I think that really gave her more power. What she did was not fiction. Maybe the end of the movie is fiction, but what she did was real, you know, and I thought it was very important to celebrate that.
And such an incredible cast across the board, but, you know, right at the center
oh my God.
of Vikander. I
Yeah.
mean, she's absolutely formidable in this role, and, you know, really sort of treads that line of course, she's having to keep up appearances a lot of the time, but underneath it, you can just see there is so much going on, and the sort of wit and intelligence and the way she handles situations, but then particularly Jude Law as well. I mean, I think so many people still have, you know, the sort of talented Mr. Ripley era heartthrob in their heads when they think of Jude Law. And here, you know, you sort of dial it up to 11 in how he's kind of taking on this sort of whole, you know, sort of this huge man, you know, whether he's on top of Catherine, or like we were saying about, you know, with his leg, the way he treats people. So how did you work with them to kind of bring these characters to life?
Listen, it was extraordinary, because we did something also that I think helped us a lot. We spent a lot of time unearthing and rehearsing the scenes before the shooting started. You know, this was a very collaborative process. with both of them, I think I had a lot to learn. In one hand, from Jude being an Englishman, and being somebody who was very knowledgeable about Henry and was very passionate about Henry. And on the other hand, I had a lot to learn with Alicia in the sense of what soft power meant. Like, I'm not talking about Catherine or Henry, I'm talking about Jude and Alicia. So there was a lot that they brought to the table in the sense of constructing these characters, that was beyond the plot. I think it was actually really character construction. And we explore a lot of those possibilities. So Jude, for example, was obsessed with what did Henry have, so he was like consulting a doctor, and he was understanding like what kind of degree of fever he had every day and how they infect, there was a real kind of profound knowledge of who Henry was. And I think with Alicia, it was this understanding, me being a man, making a movie about woman, like understanding what were the machinations that allowed her to stay alive. That's what I think was for me a really huge learning experience. She was not fighting battles, with hundreds of people dying and, people killing each other. She was fighting something in a very different way, and I think it's, for me, the other thing that was really interesting about Alicia and the way what she brought to this role is how she related to the kids, who were not her kids, and how it was so important to kind of create a relationship with Elizabeth. So I think they brought a lot, but also there was a method of working which was very much like, let's take the script and let's also find what these characters need, how do they exist? So there was a lot of changes between the script, in the moment that we actually started shooting. And there was something really special in this film that I really, really love to do. And this has to do with method, I mean, we really spent about more than 2 weeks in Haddon Hall on costumes with props, understanding what the scenes were, So they became much more real. They're not scenes about people saying their lines of dialogue. It's really, there was something for me which needed to be absolutely physical. This question I'm telling you, that we're looking at people, not looking at kings and queens. There was something that they brought that was really extraordinary in the sense of bringing a physicality to the scenes, which was incredible. And I think just one last thing about Jude, I think that's one of the reasons also that I thought it would be really interesting to work with Jude on this film, because, and I'll tell you about Alicia as well, like, I think that there is this image of talented Mr. Ripley, and I think that there is an image also of Henry as a young man, and I couldn't do flashbacks here. I wanted to be really much now on his last months. And I thought there was something quite interesting of looking at Jude and remembering Ripley, and then looking at Henry and knowing that Henry was a golden boy, was a sportsman, was somebody who composed songs, like that's why I have this scene which is kind of inspired on Elton John, when he's singing this song. That's a song that was a very popular song that he had composed. So I thought that bringing somebody that you could look through as an actor, and I thought it would be a really interesting composite. And I think with Alicia, what was really interesting to me was that she was not English. And I thought that was really interesting. I think it was very brave of like doing that character and, and portraying Catherine coming from somewhere else. But there's something also utterly modern about her that you can't take away from her. And I thought that was a very interesting friction between, looking at a woman who was living 500 years ago, but yet still being a woman from today, So I think those are the two things. Like I said, bring in things from actors that can actually enrich the role.
Maybe you can just say a few words about, I saw Motel Destino in Cannes, absolutely blown away by that as well. And I
understand. You saw it?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Good. That's wonderful.
Another very visceral film. And, maybe you can tell us what it was like working on that and also what you're working on now.
Yeah, sure. Listen, Motel Destino was really great because it was sort of the antipode of, in a way, sort of a Firebrand. I really needed to go back and shoot something in my language, in Portuguese, it was sort of coming back home. But yet it was very inspired on Firebrand because I think it's the sort of third movie that I make that it is very much sort of inspired by genre. And I think Firebrand was, Motel Destino was really this film that I wanted to understand after doing. It is somewhat of a psychological thriller as well. There are similarities there. But I think what I wanted to do after having done Firebrand was to do a movie where actually I was somehow closer to the sun and closer to the heat, there was something there physically that I really wanted to capture that was very different than Firebrand. And also having done a movie that it's so subtle, like the colors, and the light, to do something which was quite brash was really exciting, but also to flirt I think the other new thing about Motel Destino for me is like to flirt with like B movies, you know, and to flirt with the way of making movies that was not so erudite, that was somewhat more free. And I think the last thing I'll tell you about Motel Destino, I think it's a film that's also a witness of a moment in history of Brazilian history. I think there was a moment there during the last 6 years that have been horrible. You know what I mean? Like with the extreme right, with what happened with the pandemic, you know, and also, I mean, it's been really like that for 6 years, and I couldn't shoot that for 6 years. So I think there's also this sense of, you know, making a movie in a country that's just been through a war. And I think that's what Motel Destino is. It's sort of hungry for life, you know, and for color and for explosion. So I think that's what really made me want to do it. And the movie I'm working on now, I can't tell you a lot about it, but but you can find stuff about it. It's very easy. No, but I can talk about it a bit. You know, it's called Rosebush Pruning. It's a film that I'm doing in Spain, and it's written by a Greek writer called Efitimus Filippo, and it's going to be shot very soon with great people.
Wow, thank you. And I can't wait for everyone else to see Firebrand. Huge congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you.
And this future project. Thanks a lot.